Hey guys, this is Gewirtz with BluefirePoker.com, and I'm here recording a video in which I'm going to review a session I just played not too long ago at 50 no limit. Before I got into the action, I just quickly wanted to discuss moving up in stakes. My last few videos were at 25 no limit. Hopefully some of you guys who are playing 25 were able to take a lot out of it and maybe already be taking shots at 50 no limit. Or if you're playing smaller stakes, maybe you're taking a shot at whatever the next stake is for you. And just quickly, a lot of students of mine have questions about how to handle moving up in stakes. And I just wanted to say the few main things I do whenever I do take a shot at the next limit is, first of all, play at least one or two tables less than you used to play. Usually play. If you usually play 6, 4 should be fine. If you usually play a lot of tables, like 12 or 16, you might want to play 3 or 4 less. But whatever it is, play a few less tables to get comfortable at the new stake, and also game select a bit better than maybe you would. Make sure that you're only playing in games with some weaker opponents in there. You find the tables will play a lot softer when there's a weaker opponent. Obviously because there's a target at the table everyone's trying to play at. There's a lot less free betting and isolating, and players don't want to knock him out of a pot, so the games get played a lot more passively. And that's gonna allow you to get comfortable with the new stakes as far as playing for more money without having to deal with a ton of really aggressive, tough situations as maybe a game with more regulars might force you to deal with. So if all that being said, let's go ahead and get into this. And I'll show you my poker tracker for the session before we start. It was just about a 1 hour session, 260 hands, and this was the first time I've played 50 no limit in a long time. And as you say, I played pretty standard tagish stats. I actually caught a lot of very good hands, but lost a big all-in pot, so didn't end up winning too much. But as you see, 23-16, just probably a bit looser than I play. Like I said, I had a few very strong hands. And the few things I always look for when I'm reviewing my session are going to be, did I play more aggressively in position? And for the most part, the answer is yes. It looks like I was a little loose from under the gun, but small sample that happens. And then I always like to check out my showdown versus non-showdown winnings to see if I was able to get the red line to be about break even. And what I tend to find for my own play is when the red line is about break even, that I was focused and playing my A game. When it's kind of going straight down, then I was just playing my B game or C game or whatever. Basically playing too patiently, waiting for hands, not looking for spots to kind of take the pot away from my opponents. Just slowly leaking away a bit of money, making too many C-bets, whatever it is. So, go into the action here, and we'll go table by table, just to see how my reads and everything developed from each table. Here was, just one of the 3 tables. I started them more or less at the same time. I will go ahead and show this first hand. It just kind of says, or elaborates on my point. I wanted to make sure that there were some weaker opponents at these tables, and once I see a player limping in, it looks like that's the case. As you see, not too interesting of a hand. I'll just let it play right through to this one. Well, this one isn't particularly interesting. To start with, obviously I'm going to free bet kings here. Even though this player is isolating, and by free betting, I'm risking knocking the weaker opponent. We've already seen him limp twice. I don't really want to risk knocking him out of a pot, but I also don't want to slow play this early on in the session. I want to create an aggressive dynamic for myself, kind of, or leave players guessing as far as whether I am playing very aggressively or not. Not like the first pot I played particularly aggressively, betting out on the turn. But now I'm free betting. Players just aren't going to know exactly how to respond, and obviously I have a pair of kings. I want to get as much money in pre-flop as possible. And we saw also, the looser player, he did cold call a raise and a re-raise. So sometimes that'll happen as well. So if you are concerned about knocking the player out of a pot, well, sometimes they'll just call all the money anyway. So it's okay, especially with a very strong hand. So just go ahead and free bet for value and play the hand normally. We see not exactly a great flop here, and I opt to just kind of bomb it and commit myself. There's certainly the more coordinated the board texture, the bigger you want to bet in general. I think a slightly smaller bet sizing would have been a bit better. I'm assuming I was probably loading up my other tables and maybe not thinking completely clearly, but I'm certainly going to get all in with him regardless. And at this point, with half my stack in the middle and overpair, even without a heart, I'm just going to be forced to call it off. He has just too many hands in his range. Something like an ace jack with a heart, maybe some sort of eights, nines, tens with a heart type hand. Just naked ace of hearts, all sorts of hands in his range which I've beat. Very difficult for him to be ahead of me. He basically has to flop a flush. Obviously, there's a couple sets possible, but I have a pair of kings here, a lot of money in the pot. I'm gonna commit to it, and I'll just play it out. A weaker opponent again calls, and I'm able to win the first pot. We'll just let it go ahead to. Okay, so this was against a weaker, again against someone who I now realize is a weaker opponent. He min re-raises me. I just min raised the button because I don't know. Well, I guess his short stack was the reason why I assumed he was probably a weaker opponent. I'm not sure if I'd seen anything out of him previously, so I decided to open. I don't know, not particularly loose. I guess it's pretty standard for me. I don't bet this flop when check two. Looking back, if I played a hand, the same hand against this opponent, knowing what I know now about him, I would have bet this flop. I find a lot of times when opponents min re-raise you and then check a flop to you, they're often looking to check raise, but I don't think this opponent was. You see, there's an ace on the turn. I just decided getting 4.5 to 1. I was getting a bit too good a price to give up that hand on the turn. When he bets again on the river, I very much have a bluff catcher, and no reason to think that he's bluffing twice. He probably just had something along the lines of ace 10 or some sort of a marginal hand, which kind of his playing style. He just kind of did that as far as min re-raising pre-flop with decent but not particularly great hands. Not exactly sure what his thought process is, but again, like I said, knowing that, I would have just bet this flop when check two if this same hand came up again later. It looks like there's no action for about 5-10 hands or whatever. And then it looks like I get another pair of kings. Let's try to get to that. Okay, so it looks like it's... Whoops. It looks like it's kings in the small blinds again. I'll try to replay that. I don't... It seems like there's just a limper and I raise it up and everyone folds. Okay, nothing interesting there. Again, I'm in raise the button against this weaker opponent, and it looks like I'm just gonna go for a second straight value. Obviously the turn there's a bit of a decision here. Clearly pre-flop, I min raised my entire range on the button. I definitely think as far as pre-flop goes, the most important thing about pre-flop bet sizing and ranges and all that is to stay consistent and not be giving away tells. So I'm gonna min raise ace queen on the button. I'm gonna min raise king 7 offsuit. I'm gonna min raise 2 aces. Just whatever I'm playing, I'm min raising. Even against a weaker opponent who is less likely to pick up on that, there's still the small blinds in the pot who's probably just a standard tag who's gonna realize what's happening if I start messing with my raise sizes. So clearly this is a flop I want to see bet for value. Top pair, second kicker, almost always the best hand there. And then on the turn, I'm looking to bet fold. I still think there's a good amount of worse hands you can call me, worse aces, a few straight draws, which a looser opponent might call twice with something like king 10. And if he raises here, I have a pretty easy fold. Obviously, he has some jacks in his range. But our opponent just folds here, so that's fine as well. And it looks like I open an ace-4 from the cutoff. Standard enough. Suited. I'm mostly raising suited aces from that spot. Like the next hand comes up a few hands later. And I'm going to review every hand where I put money in the pot. So I know a few of these won't be particularly interesting as far as another button min raise. Not exactly the best board texture to see bet, but like I said, this is a weaker opponent. He's gonna hit it a bit more often than I'd like, but I really have no other way to win this pot than fire one c bet at it. I don't expect him to play back with anything marginal. He's gonna call a bit too often with some marginal hands, but I don't really expect to get check raised bluffed or anything. So decided to just take a c bet up the pot and win. Was able to win it, luckily. And let's see how... Okay, well, we'll just do it like this. This was, a somewhat interesting hand. open an ace-7 suited from early position. I think this is a bit loose to do 100% of the time, but it's certainly fine with some frequency. It looked like I hadn't played a hand for a while, 10 hands, whatever it is exactly, so I opened to play a hand, which is, I don't know, maybe I'm raising it probably under 50% of the time from this position. But, it's certainly any suited ace from any position could be played given the right table conditions. And it seems like a good time to raise right here. And in this spot, I actually get led into. This seemed to have been, as you can see, I folded. This seemed to be a pretty competent opponent. I think he was playing something like 23-20 or whatever, pretty standard tag. I'm not quite sure why he would lead out on this flop, but against a lot of weaker opponents, I'm just going to raise regardless. I think I've discussed that in previous videos. They just don't really raise with a range. Very frequently, they're not raising with the range they're looking to continue with. Against a better opponent, well, they tend to have a reason for betting out, or a much stronger reason. And whether that's because he's looking to bet free bet a flush draw, maybe bet free bet a set, try to be a bit deceptive, or even if he's just looking to bet call with a jack, I think it's more likely that he's leading out with a hand which he does plan on continuing with than with the hands which he doesn't. I think my only other option in this hand is to float the flop and maybe raise diamond turns. I think it much more credibly represents a very big hand, whereas just raising this flop, I think by these stakes players have kind of seen it, that a lot of more aggressive regs will just raise donk bets regardless. It's not the most unique strategy out there. So by raising this flop, my range more or less looks like the same range I had pre-flop, just anything I chose to open with. But if I chose to float the flop and raise the turn, it looks like, I could have possibly improved. For example, if it's like a 10 of diamonds turn, and I raise, I'm very credibly representing jack 10 or pocket 10s. My opponent might fold something like, I don't know, queen jack, as far as, a marginal top pair type hand. Which is now not likely to be good. And also, it's pretty likely to take him off. If he just has a naked flush draw on the flop, he might be looking to rush a whole bunch of money in and, play it aggressively, try to take me off whatever marginal overpair or top pair type hand I have. Whereas on the turn, his equity goes down a lot. So, again, there's a chance he would fold that hand on the turn. So, if I did want to continue, if I had a better read on my opponent, I'd consider floating and raising, because I do have a backdoor flush draw. Raising diamond turns would be the best candidate for that, but obviously, I just opted to fold. There wasn't a ton of money in the pot, not a great read on my opponent. I didn't feel there was much of a need to mess around in the spot. And then one hand later, we'll see something. I defend my big blind versus the same opponent. One hand later, blind versus blind, jack 9 offsuit. I think it's pretty standard as it is. I certainly don't want to give up, my big blinds when I'm in position. I don't want to give up too easily. Jack 9 plays reasonably well, and we'll see kind of last hand, I just gave up on the pot, played straightforward, and you see, against a kind of standard tag reg, this kind of dynamic will show up, where, I just gave him credit on the first one, and now he sees a flop where, excuse me, he can't represent too much, and he, you take one, I take one. It's not a rule or anything like that, it's not a particularly friendly game, but you will see this happen, on occasion against the regs. They just kind of don't go nuts against each other at these stakes, and we'll just let you take a pot here and there, and it's kind of what happened. Or it's what it seemed like to me. Next pot, it looked like I somehow lost money here. It looks like I min-raised the button, and might have got that min-free bet again, and maybe just folded the flop, or... Okay, so, standard enough. Yeah, so I got min free bet by the same looser opponent, and, at that point, I'm just priced into calling. On the flop here, as you guys saw, with second pair, I opt to just call his c-bet. At this point, I still didn't know exactly what his range was. I figure a pair of jacks, are just very likely to be ahead of his range. It's at this point in the session, it was certainly the second time he min-re-raised me. I don't know if it was the second or third or fourth time I'd seen him do it, period. But it didn't seem like he had to have a particularly strong hand. My guess is that my pair of jacks were good at this point. Not sure if he improved here. Obviously, he checked. I just want to get this showdown. I have my hands... there's a bit of merit to betting, clearly because I don't want to see a queen or a 10 on the river. But for the most part, I'm just looking to get the showdown as quick as possible, and, I guess he improved on the river. don't think he was really bluffing. My hand is clearly very much a bluff catcher at this point. Again, not a ton of money in the pot. My read on him not clear enough to be looking him up with a hand like this. Okay, this was a pretty interesting pot. This is the first hand I actually played with this player on the button. Again, a pretty straight, or, from what I could tell of what he'd played, he hadn't been too active, fairly straightforward taggish type player. Didn't seem like he'd be messing around too much. Obviously, I'm opening ace queen from any position. Flop top, pair top kicker, pretty good flop for my hand, but, obviously I could be beat. My opponent goes ahead and raises, and I have to just fold right there. Basically, I don't really see any reason for him to be just stone cold bluff raising, like raising a hand like an ace jack. Which, obviously isn't a stone cold raise, a bluff raise. It has an inside straight draw, but I didn't think he'd be raising many marginal hands at all. He certainly has a few hands like Jack 9 of diamonds, or 8 9 of diamonds, King Jack of diamonds, Ace Jack of diamonds. Actually, there's a ton of combo draws in his range, but I'm roughly flipping against those hands, and I would assume he could also be calling pre-flop with Queen 10 suited on the button. Makes some sense, and certainly 10s and 7s. And actually, you'll see some tighter players just flat call of queens in a spot like that, even though there's only one combo left. It's not impossible. So I'm completely crushed by his value range, and only flipping against his semi-bluffing range. And I don't expect him to be raising a worse hand for value like King Queen. I think he's pretty likely to just flat call. And generally speaking, when you're in a situation where you're either flipping or crushed, you want to fold. You want to get money in spots where you're either flipping or very far ahead. So to talk about this a bit further, clearly it is very exploitable to fold top pair top kicker to a single raise. If my opponent kept on raising me on flops like this, I'd simply have to adjust by no longer folding top pair top kicker, increasing my value stack off range or whatever. But for starters, for the most part, top pair, even a hand as strong as top pair top kicker, is really much closer to a bluff catcher than a value hand against a standard taggish opponent who at these stakes won't have as balanced a flop raising range to include a ton of bluffs. So you can feel pretty confidently folding a hand that strong to a flop raise to, again, a standard tag. Clearly against a maniac or whatever who's going to have a lot more, I guess, weak semi-bluffs, something like 4 or 5 of diamonds, or just stone cold bluffs, or weaker value hands. It might be a hand you want to stack off with. But, against a player I haven't played a pot with, he really hadn't played a pot at this table, really, at this time. I'm fine just giving him some credit and folding right then and there. Looks like I, again, color raise with, suited big cards against an undergun raiser. Good hand to take a flop with, and my opponent just check folds to me. No real other way for me to play that hand. I don't like free betting or folding pre-flop. Definitely a great hand to just call and take a flop with. Looks like I get 2 aces against that same opponent, and he just folds to my free bet. Again, standard, really no other options there. Oops. And on a dry flop, it looks like I'm able to take down another pot with a C-bet. Looks like I'm going to lose a decent sized pot here. Oh, okay. This was, again, not the most interesting pot in the world, but against a weaker opponent, certainly going to call off Queen Jack of diamonds. Flop really well, obviously, and my opponent goes ahead and bets out full pot here. This didn't seem like the type of opponent who would be betting full pot as a bluff, or, with his entire range or anything along those lines. I just thought when he bet big, he had a pretty strong hand, so there really wasn't any value in my mind of check raising right here. Basically, I felt I was flipping against an ace or better, which was his range. He has right here, in my opinion, an ace or better, more or less, always. I'm only flipping against it, so I don't want to rush any money, and I just want to, getting 2-1 and a 50-50 proposition, I just want to call and see a turn card and try to hit, clearly a 10 is going to be the best card for me because it's a bit more deceptive, but a diamond certainly wouldn't upset me. And like I said before, I lose money here and here. Again on the turn, same thing. I don't really expect him to be folding, so I just want to take my pot odds. Don't want to turn into a semi-bluff or anything like that. Just didn't feel like this opponent would be betting twice as a bluff. Didn't feel like he would fold. Even if he just had a hand like ace-5, I didn't think I was going to take him off it. So again, like I said, just clear, easy case of pot odds, getting 3-1 as I don't know my exact odds, but with some implied odds as well. You know, I'm gonna win a bet on the river. If I hit my hands, certainly a good shape to call there. Looks like another ace queen on the button against a weaker opponent. Again, another min raise, and in this pot I opted to just check down. Wasn't really folding out too many better hands, maybe no better hands on this flop and turn. So I decided to just try to take my ace high to showdown. By the time it gets to the river like that, my second pair is basically always good, or two pair, however you want to say it. So I certainly had to value bet the river, but yeah, my opponent just didn't have anything to call with. This was somewhat of an interesting hand. I don't think it'll really show up in the replayer, but one thing I believe I may have talked about it in previous videos. Let's try to go back. In real time, I paused for a decent amount. I was considering whether or not to c-bet this flop. So basically, my thought process was it was a very similar, or it was maybe the same exact board texture, the same exact flop as the previous one with the ace queen, two kings, and a low card. It was either a 4 or 5 last time. And I considered, again, playing the hand the same way, even out of position. Clearly in position, it's much easier to just check behind this flop and get the showdown. And if I was in position, I certainly would do that. Out of position, I had the decision between leading out here and checking, and still, trying to get the showdown. Because it was a more passive opponent, I certainly felt that was an option. And after tanking for a little while, I finally just decided to bet. And what I was gonna say is, yeah, if you do take a bit of time, an abnormal timing or whatever, your bets tend to get less respect. I don't know for sure. Clearly he could have just had a king here. I can't tell you for sure whether it affected the situation or not. But I do try to make sure that my timing is pretty regular. Just wait a few seconds and always bet after 3 or 4 seconds, whatever it is. And here I probably waited 6 or 8 seconds, and I got min raised. So it is what it is. Obviously, he can have a king, but my timing possibly played a role. And consider that. Try to make all your plays within the same kind of normal timing, and you won't get into that leveling type situation. I certainly considered 3-betting him here, but I decided not to really worry about it and just give him credit and move on to the next hand. It looks like most of the hands I play on this table were just me min-raising the button against this guy. But just a few more hands and we'll finish it up. I think again here I checked behind and just more or less gave up here. I felt like, oh, we'd lose our opponent. Just check calling too many hands. I didn't know exactly where to barrel, where not to. And again, I felt he'd let me get to showdown with an ace high, and he probably would have. By the turn, I'm betting for value protection with my pair of threes. I think he could call off a lot worse hands. He could probably call off a 4, a 6, maybe some sort of another, like Jack 9 is a straight draw. So I have to go for a very thin value on the turn. Also, whatever hand he has is going to have plenty of equity. He's obviously got 2 overcards to a 3, so good spot to just pick up the pot. I think with ace king here against the 2 regular tags in the pot, I just it looks like a squeeze. I'm very much willing to stack off. Even against the tighter player here, I would have stacked off. Certainly against the player on the button when he doesn't free bet, I'm very comfortable stacking off with ace king against him. I think both of these might just be picking up the blinds. Oh, no, this was... Whoops. So the king-jack hand, raising at 2 colors, and I do see bet this flop even against 2 opponents. I don't think I'm getting raised on this flop all that much. Basically, clearly ace, 10, 8s, and 10s are the hands which might free bet. And plenty of pocket pairs will fold. A decent amount of broadways will fold, particularly if Ant Rock has the Broadway, if he has a very similar hand to mine. King Jack or King Queen in particular. Queen Jack isn't folding because it's a 2-way straight draw, but he'll likely fold it with a player behind him. And heads up pot, he's more likely to float against me with an inside straight draw. But in a multi-way pot, he's going to fold. And the same thing might be said about pairs of tens, 10 jack, 9 10. He might just fold with the player left behind him. And Bonham over here probably has just a lot of pocket pairs, a lot of drawing hands in his range. So my hand, obviously it can improve. That's always one very important thing when you are semi-bluffing. How much equity do you have in the pot? And, I have an inside straight draw, queen for nuts. And I think I have enough fold equity to go ahead and c-bet here. And I do, and it works. And then the last hand at the table, I have ace-king versus under the gun razor. I hadn't been playing particularly aggressive. I wasn't comfortable stacking off with ace-king, even ace-king suited against the under the gun player. So I opted to just flat call and see a flop. Ace-king suited plays well multi-way. There's also the nice added benefit of maybe allowing the weaker player in the pot, or if the game hadn't been playing so aggressively that I, was looking to induce a squeeze, but it wouldn't have been the end of the world if there was a squeeze and my hand is kind of underrepresented. And I could possibly play back at that. And also, obviously, if I catch an ace-high flop, like I said, my hand's a bit underrepresented. I might be able to get a lot more money out of a hand like ace-queen or ace-jack. I flop a flush draw. Clearly, I, can't fold. Option is between raising and calling. I think raising here, more or less my entire raising range is flush draws. I really don't have any value hands in it. I don't tend to slow play aces or kings all that much against under the gun raisers. I'll certainly do it on occasion, but not too much at all. If you do have some big pocket pairs in your range, if you have, which would give you a decent amount of value hands, then it's more reasonable to raise this flop with flush draws. But given that when you do raise this flop, you're representing a weird spastic bluff or a flush draw. I didn't want to represent the exact hand I had. Floating adds again, a good bit of deceptive value to my hand. My hand is still good here, some for sure. He's gonna barrel some cards which I hit, mostly the ace and the king, possibly the heart as well. And obviously, I have a ton of equity to improve against whatever he has if he's ahead. And we see he does barrel the king on the turn. Again, I don't really see much of a reason to raise. I have the best hand on the turn. Almost always. I don't expect he has any sevens in his range except for quad sevens, pocket fives, both very unlikely. And obviously pocket kings, pocket aces have me beat. All of this very unlikely, combo-wise, and just, his range is much wider than that. King a card he's gonna barrel, just regardless. And I'm planning on calling any river. Obviously I'd raise, I'd likely raise a heart river, or certainly a king river, depending on the action went. See, it's just a jack river. My opponent checks. I think he's giving up almost always here. The only way I can possibly get more money out of this hand is to try to represent a bluff, such as busted hearts with maybe 9-10 of hearts or something like that. I don't think there's any reason to value bet small and try to. It just kind of doesn't make sense. If I did have like a middle pocket pair or something like that, which decided to get stubborn on the turn, it's certainly going to call the flop, like a pair of eights, and got stubborn calling on the turn, I'm going to check behind. So if I am betting this river, I have to either, somehow have, flopped or turned a very strong hand, which I guess I did. I did turn a very strong hand, or be bluffing with busted hearts. So, for both of these hands, whether I have a very strong hand, which I would basically consider this being a very strong hand, or if I have busted hearts, I want to be betting pretty big with my entire range. So I did it, looking to get the hero call for maybe, he has ace-jack, which picked up some showdown value on the river, pair of tens, pair of queens, which get curious or something, but he didn't. I guess he didn't have any of that, or, he figured me out and opted not to call with whatever he had. So let's go ahead and like I said, I was playing these. I'm gonna go ahead and review all three tables I played. I played all three at the same time. I don't think that really affects anything as far as the analysis goes, but just to let you know where I'm at for why I chose these three tables. It was just a 1 hour session I played, and it looks like I lose a nice big pot here. I remember this hand. So I decided to call on the button with the 7-8 suited here. Typically, I like to, more often than not, I like to be in 3-better fold mode with these middle connectors on the button, or the smaller middle connectors. 7-8 is kind of on the borderline for me. Like a 9-10, Jack-10 suited, I'm almost always calling. Like 4-5 suited, I'm very much in 3-better fold mode. Here I decided to just take the flop. Even though we're only a few hands in, maybe I'd played with the blinds or something before. I don't know. I had some reason to believe that they were just kind of not going to be squeezing a ton. And I certainly felt that this player already was a weaker opponent. So I wanted to take a flop in position against him. Not. It's fine, it's kind of standard enough. When I saw this bet sizing, betting $1.50 into a $5 pot on such a dry connecting board, I decided basically my opponent had to be weak here. If he had a hand which he was really happy with, comfortable with, or whatever, he'd want to protect it. So by raising here, what I'm doing is I'm forcing Burning Wind into a very tough decision. If he has any sort of a marginal one pair hand, he basically has to fold it, even if he has like King 10 or King Queen. When it goes bet raise, it's going to be real tough for him to play that out of position. He's more or less forced to fold some marginal draws as well. If he has something like a similar hand as mine, more like 5, 6 of clubs, or there's really no other option for him to take other than folding. And it's very tough for him to have a very strong hand. I do have the 7, using it as like a blocker, or, I can improve on the turn, however you want to say that. So it takes 7s out of his range. Kings and Jacks are very likely out of his range. The only, value hands he's going to have here is King Jack and a few combo draws which might not fold, like Queen 10 of clubs might just stick it in anyway. So basically, I expect him to be folding a lot, and Ilven's I expect it to be pretty weak and to be folding a lot. The first player folded, the second one did not go along with my plan. I turn an 8, I do improve. I decided to just bet fold here. I felt my hand was good too often to give a free card, to allow something like a Ace Jack with a club or King Queen with a club, something like that to see a free turn card. But certainly with the club on the turn, he can easily have called the flop of flush draw. So I wanted to bet an amount which allowed me to fold to a shove, and even with 2 pair, I have a bluff catcher. I decided to just follow through with my plan. Let's see. Okay, I didn't quite remember this hand. Oh, it looks like I decided to just check back this flop and bet this turn. Clearly I could see bet this flop. I think at the time I was thinking because that bluff raise, I'd shown a lot of aggression in that hand a hand or two ago. It was 2 hands ago at this time, and ended up folding. Just generally speaking, I thought I'd get a bit less credit for a hand, and Queen 9-2 is certainly a board where opponent can be check raising somewhat light. This opponent seems competent enough that he's check raising a King Jack type hand or whatever, inside straight draw, flush draw, often enough that I don't really want to even put in money with threes, which is more or less the bottom of my range. It has the worst equity again, even though it's occasionally ahead. Very rarely improves. Very poor equity against his range. So I have to just give up there. But when my opponent checked twice, it just seemed like he was giving up on the pot. And if your opponent is giving up on the pot, you want to say allow them to give up on it and go ahead and just fire a turn bet and take it away from him. I'm assuming he folded a slightly stronger hand, something like 4s or 5s. So it likely was a pretty good bet. It looks like I might fold this hand. I just fold King Jack offsuit under the gun. I guess that is kind of a standard fold for me. King Queen is kind of my, quote unquote standard. I'm always raising under the gun, but I think given this table dynamic with a weaker opponent in the big blind, I think I should have raised there. And it looks like I defended with King Jack offsuit, again fairly standard, and opted to raise this flop with just top pair. I saw my opponent call a raise with, well, what I assumed had happened in that previous hand, which I played against him, and I still stand by that assumption, is he called a raise on a fairly dry flop with a draw. So I decided that he could probably call a raise on this fairly dry flop with a draw again. So I decided to raise my top pair for value. I didn't expect to be free bet all that often because, as he'd shown previously, he's just pretty likely to play his draws passively. So I thought top pair was plenty of hand to get value out of. So I raised this turn card. He bets small again, and obviously looking back, I know he had a worse hand than mine. So I feel like maybe there's a chance I could have found a raise. Again, he bets really small into a draw board. Obviously, the ace isn't the best card in the deck for me at all, but it's not the absolute worst. I guess, I don't know, maybe a 10 of hearts or some sort of a more ace of hearts is worse. Whatever it is. Some of which completes a few more draws. They're a bit easier for him to actually have in his hand. when he bets 150, I am pretty likely to be good on the turn. And again, when you are kind of trying to get value out of a draw, you're just going to get a lot more value out of a flush draw on the turn than you are on the river, obviously because you can call a raise with a draw on the turn, whereas, you can't call a bet with a draw on the river. So I think there's some chance I could have found the raise here again on the turn, but I opted to just play it cautiously and call. And my opponent bet 3 into 15, and he's kind of weird and spastic. I didn't know what to do. So when that happens, I, just call, getting a good price, and it turns out he does have a pair and a draw. And I don't know why he's betting a pair of threes on the river. Doesn't make a ton of sense to me, but I'm good, and I learn a lot about my opponent there, but he's just kind of playing around, probably a casual player, doesn't know exactly what he's doing, and he's someone I'm now I do see he is making those smaller bets with kind of marginal hands, so I'll try to adjust. I think I adjust to it in the next hands, but adjust later on. And yeah, again, so this is the third pot in a row I play with him. So I decided to defend A7 suited in position. Like I said, it's because this is a weaker opponent. I think the button, clear the button's sitting out. So basically, I had the button here, weaker opponent. This is not a hand I usually defend with, but because it's the weaker opponent, and I half second the big blind. I guess I assumed he was a weaker opponent as well. I don't really remember this guy, Candid, as much as I do Ilven's. But I decided I could profitably take a flop here. And for the third time in a row, I think I flopped top pair again. Well, I represented top pair every time. This is the second time I actually have it. And like I said previously, he seemed to be calling raises on the flop with marginal hands, so I decided to raise a very marginal hand for value. Top pair, no kicker, and like I said before, I go for the turn value. If he's going to call a bet with a draw, it's going to be on the turn, not on the river. So I again bet an amount, which my plan was still to bet fold. We didn't have so much history where I was going to be stacking off with his hand. I wouldn't have been excited to bet fold this turn, but I would have likely still followed through with that plan. And like I said, just to get some value out of whatever draws he might have, or it doesn't really have any weaker aces, but maybe a few weaker pairs. So yeah, it goes to show here that against looser opponents, you want to be raising more hands for value. So all these top pair marginal top pair type hands, which I'm typically not raising against attack for value against a looser opponent, it's certainly fine. And this is the next hand I played against him, and it turns into a kind of a leveling situation. I certainly considered raising him for the fourth time in a row on this flop with Jack High, but I decided to just play it straightforward. Certainly defending Jack 10 in position against him. Certainly the standard play in that flop is just to fold. And one thing to say, clearly we're about 10 or 15 hands into the session. I can't tell exactly. Basically, every pot has been against this one opponent. He was playing something like 60-40, and I position on him. So that's certainly one reason. But it also goes to show, like I said before, you want to game select well, and you certainly want to make sure that you're playing most of your pots with a weaker opponent. It's gonna just be much more profitable in the long run. I don't think I ended up actually winning much or any money off of this guy, but certainly if I stayed at the table long enough, I was gonna bust him. It tends to be how it works out. When you stay with these guys, they just make one, silly big mess up where they get all in with like second pair against your set. Unfortunately, that hand never came up. But this hand right here, Ace King, clearly, here, like I said, just at the last table against an opponent who was a more standard opponent, I didn't want to free bet and stack off against his ends of a gun range. Against this guy, I was, very happy and excited to. Also, I certainly felt there was much more value in getting called by worse, even raising in such a strong position, as opposed to that hand on the last table, where I have to just call off my Ace King. So I do get called, and miss the flop. I decided to just try to check and get it to showdown. It seems like my opponent is going along with that until the river. There can probably be... I certainly considered calling this river bet. Clearly, he can be bluffing. That's the reason why I considered calling. What is his range? It's just very hard to say right here. Like I said, he's opening something like 60% of hands. He might have something like King 5 hearts in his range. I don't know, just kind of random things. which missed, and I'm not sure how thin he'll bet for value. But because I didn't think it was, impossible for him to bet a hand like a pair of fives here for value, or just, I don't know if he'd see it as a value bet, just bet with it, or whether he'd, be able to read my hand properly for what it was, an ace-high trying to get to showdown, or not. I thought there was too much of a chance that he would bet something slightly better than my hand for value. Clearly, like I said, the reason why I could possibly call here is all the bluffs are still in his range. Whether he would bluff or not, I wasn't 100% sure. So I decided to just fold, getting 3-1 with, just a stone cold bluff catcher. There's no way I'm beating anything he's beating. He's not going to bet ace queen for value. I have to just give it up. And this is something which is certainly fine to do against these very loose opponents. You do want to have a hand against them more often than not. And certainly on a board texture like this, which is not a perfect c-bet board by any means, there's a few straight draws, a flush draw. A jack could certainly be in his range. And there's no ace or king scare card. If he does have a pair of fives, he might immediately put me on ace king and decide to call and see a turn. So it's going to be tough to take him off his, any better hands on his flop. So checking and trying to get to showdown is certainly fine. Again, against looser, more passive call station type opponents, no real reason to try to bluff him here. Okay. So open 9-10 suited, a cutoff pretty standard. Obviously catch a pretty good flop and opt to fire two. Oh, I certainly fired the second barrel at it. So clearly it's a c-bet on this flop. I have a ton of equity versus absolutely everything. Even king 10, I'm not dead against. I have my heart draw. And he's going to be folding out. His range when he calls him a button, he's going to have a decent amount of Broadway type hands, which none of them are going to fold. Even Jack 10 is certainly going to float and see a turn card. Clearly it has to be a pair and a draw or whatever if it's a Broadway type hand. But all his pocket pairs are going to fold here. So a lot of his range is going to fold. And when he does call this flop, pretty important concept. When an opponent calls a very drawing connecting flop, they just very rarely have a strong hand. Even if he did flop the nuts, if he had king 10 or certainly a hand stronger than that, I wouldn't think ace queen is impossible for him to have. Ace jack, queen jack. Opponent's going to be pretty likely to play his stronger hands very fast here because, like I said, if he has king 10, he wants to make sure that the money gets in both before possibly heart rolls off the deck and his hands is a bit more marginal, and also before king or a 10 rolls off the deck and he can no longer get value out of his second best hands I might have, like a set, or even I just have to, or I end up splitting the pot with him if I have only a 10 or a king in my hand. So when my opponent just calls this flop, I expect him to have some sort of a marginal Broadway hand, king queen, maybe king jack, like I said, jack 10, queen 10, excuse me, maybe an ace x type hand, ace 5 or suited, something along those lines. So I was going to fire all three barrels here. I was betting return to set up a nice big river bluff. Well, maybe I'd hit a heart on the river, but even if whether I hit a heart, a king, a 10, or nothing, I would be betting the river. I guess the only card I probably wouldn't bluff on the river would be an offsuit ace, meaning an ace that's not a heart. Ace of hearts I bet for value. But I was planning on firing all three barrels here, but the opponent just folded the turn. Looks like I just steal the blind here. I opened a jack 10 suited from under the gun, and this was just to target the fish in the big blind. Like I've said before, this is a hand I'm not opening 100% of the time, pretty decent amount though, and a pretty tight player free bet me from under the gun +1, so just went ahead and folded. Two aces. Okay, so well. Yeah, I decided to just raise and commit on this flop here. A looser opponent. I think I haven't replayed a hand, but I think I've seen him bet fold in spots like this against other opponents. When I wasn't involved in the hands. Two aces still figures to be a pretty big favorite on this flop. I don't really expect my opponent to be leading out with huge hands. Something like a straight or whatever. I expect him to have something marginal or a draw, and for him to be able to overplay something like maybe two nines or whatever it is. So I have to just kind of bomb it. I didn't really want to see a turn card. A board's too connecting, and just raise real big and commit to the hand right there. Oh, this was an interesting hand. um, so my opponent leads out again, similar to what he did last time. Similar board texture. Obviously, this one's monotone. The other one was two-tone. But, a dry, middling type board texture. And same opponent leads out again. I have Ace Queen High, which certainly can be good if he has some sort of a worse draw. And obviously, I have a Queen of Hearts, so I decided to float in position. And like I said, I knew previously that he bet folded. So my assumption is that he might be betting out marginal hands. Now my hands, I don't know, it just doesn't improve. I pick up an inside straight to go along with my flush draw. King's a scare card. I know my opponent's betting out with marginal hands and, can possibly fold to a raise, so I decided to just semi-bluff right here. I'm risking a bit more money than I'd like to. I guess I'm risking 28 to win 12, or, as closer to 29 to win $12. Not the exact price I'd like to be getting, but I have enough equity, and I thought my opponent was folding often enough, and the play worked. So, it kind of, one of those hands, I don't really consider myself a field player, but it kind of felt right at the time. He felt weak for whatever reason that happens to be. And it was mostly based on my read from a past hand. It wasn't, that I'm just closing my eyes and clicking buttons. It was certainly, somewhat based on the read, but the play was able to work, so. And here I flop top set, and, I basically never do this, but I have this board so absolutely crippled, and I don't think against such a weak opponent my checking behind would be as suspicious as it would be against a tag. Against a normal tag, if you don't c-bet a king 8-2 rainbow board, very close to the ideal c-betting board, it's going to look extremely suspicious, very, particularly if you start putting in action on later streets. It's just obvious that you slow played something, or maybe if it turns a free, maybe it turns a set of frees. But it'll look like one of those two things against this opponent, who'd shown some tendency to kind of bet when given the opportunity to. I decided to allow him to maybe catch up a bit or just bluff. It's just hard for him to have all that much. There's only one king left in the deck. Not going to get I don't think I'm going to get a ton of money out of an 8 anyway, so I decided to see a turn card, check behind, try to win some more money out of him. Now the board's a bit more connecting. I want to start building a pot. Clearly, I just need to start betting my top set for value. Doesn't need a ton more explanation than that, but he didn't have anything. This was an annoying hand. So I decided to defend with my queen 6 suited in position. Again, weaker opponent, hand plays well enough, flops well enough, or whatever. I decided I could probably outplay him. I flop second pair. I don't choose to raise, and he just keeps making these small bets. And I river 2 pair, and I make a cry and call him a river. And I guess it's for, I don't know. He has 2 5s here. Just someone who's going to play a hand like that. It probably is for I call. Really don't know what they're doing. Maybe he would have betting, I don't know if he's betting bad for value. Maybe he would have bet it ace high again on a river, maybe not. Tough to say, but like I said, against kind of a random opponent who's doing weird things, if you're getting a good price, you should probably look him up. Here, I chose to limp behind with my 10-8 suited, or Jack-8 suited, as opposed to isolating. Basically, I felt the blinds were both kind of passive enough, and I didn't think Kong was really ever going to fold to an isolation raise. I hadn't seen him do it before, so with a hand which isn't particularly far ahead of his range or anything, I certainly felt that I could profitably play it in position by calling, but I didn't really see much of a reason to raise. And like I said, the reason being, I don't expect either of the blinds to be isolating if I don't. If you think your limp is going to induce a raise from the blinds, you're better off just raising or folding yourself. If you think you can get away with this, well then go ahead and do it. Play a bit of a cheaper pot in position is fine as well. And again, just to finish off that thought or whatever, I do isolate much more often than I limp. This was a good situation to limp, but I guess I want to say more standard play should be to isolation raise. This was just a good situation to limp in, just to kind of clarify that. And also, when you do limp in, make sure that you are not just looking to hit a hand. You need to be stabbing at the pot, whether you have much of a hand or not. Right here, this is. Even though I have, clearly I have Jack High, I have absolutely nothing, there are just a ton of turn cards which improve my hand. There's a lot of ways I could turn a straight draw, flush draw, a Jack, or an 8. And, opponents are just likely to check fold a board like this if they missed. I am representing a hand here. Clearly, if I'm limping Jack 8 suited, I could be limping Jack 9 suited. Heart draws, maybe a pair of threes. So it's a credible bluff. And like I said, when you are playing hands of a button, passively, or I guess on an early street, you're playing in position to be able to steal the pot later on, not to just flop a flush. That won't happen often enough. You need to try to steal the pot when given the opportunity. It looks like right here, like I said, the blinds were tighter, so, when it's folded to me on the button, I'm going to be stealing with a slightly wider range than usual. I think Jack 8's kind of my standard cutoff, and I open a Jack 7 there. This was an interesting hand. No, not really. Yeah, I just take a flop of King Queen. He was a bit too deep for one of 3-bet and stack off against, so I just have to just take a flop and play it straightforward from there. This is the interesting King Queen hand. I kind of leveled myself out of a decent sized pot. Here, I think this is very standard, fine. Weaker player in the big blind, even against a tighter standard under the gun raiser, King Queen will play well enough in position. It's not dominating much, maybe not dominating any of his range, but because it's suited connecting, it allowed me to continue often enough and play. I can play it in position post flop well enough, particularly with the fish in a pot. But it's a pretty clear call. Maybe you can consider free betting it as a bluff against a very tight opponent, but typically, generally speaking, I want to do that with the offsuit version and take a flop of a suited version. Top flop, top pair, good kicker. Like I said, against a more normal tag, this is a spot where I'm very often calling. Against ill vens, I probably would have raised in this spot, but I did just call. Opponent checks return. I think he's checking to give up here almost always. So I decided to make a small kind of inducing bet and kind of go with my read that maybe this bet didn't do something. So I, go ahead and call. Even though it's basically it was a bad river card. Again, Ace of Hearts would have been worse. But once I made that play to induce a raise on the turn, I decided to go with my read and go with what I tried to do, and he just turned a set of 8s, so I kind of leveled myself there. I guess a more standard play would be bet a bit bigger and fold to a raise. I guess I want to say without having some sort of a history. I didn't have a history or dynamic, but like I said, I thought my bet sizing was small enough to induce. Without having some sort of a reason to think your opponent is making a play on the turn, a bet fold is okay. Most players aren't going to check raise this turn as a bluff, certainly as a standard. It's just not a spot many players bluff in. So if you have no reason to think they're bluffing, you should just either bet fold or check behind and get to showdown. Look like I folded that King 10. Oh, he probably opened? Not sure why I folded that. King 10 probably a hand I could open, but whatever. I do open 2 queens. Don't remember this hand. Okay. Seems like it just played itself. And this was another fairly interesting hand due to the history we just had. I decided to just call up Ace 2 suited again, weaker opponent in the pot, and a hand which will play well enough multi-way. I just 5 hands ago, whatever it is, had that 8s versus King Queen hand against this player on the button. I considered leading out here. So basically, my thought process in the hand was this: 3 ways. I don't think this is a flop. Daddy over here will c-bet without a hand all that often. I felt my pair of 2s was often good. I could possibly get a bit of value out of Ilvens, or basically just try to pick up a pot right here, and I can continue on a lot of turn cards, more or less using my hand as, I don't know, a semi-bluff or trying to steal the pot. However exactly you want to say it. After thinking through a bit more, I decided, well, my hand is just a bit too weak for that. If the button isn't c-betting all that often, that's okay. I'm going to see a turn card and, bet most turns. And if he does bet, I could just comfortably bet fold. And the reason, the main reason why I didn't want to lead out is because I wasn't quite sure how he would interpret it. I didn't want to get bluff raised. It's not like I'm so concerned about being blown off the best hand, it's just a pair of 2s. But, I still don't want to be, I still don't want it to happen. So, after thinking for a bit, I decided to just check, and like I said, I didn't expect him to c-bet this board particularly light, so decided to just give up with my pair of 2s. And this is a bit more interesting pair of queens. I free bet my calling station friend there, catch a pretty bad flop, decide to pot control, similar to what I did with the ace king. At this point, I go for some value on the turn when he checks twice, but can't get it. Yeah, I guess not too much more to be said about that. Okay. In position, I decided to defend my queen 10 here, and again raise the top pair on the flop against a player who'll call for a lot worse. We get cold called by this guy. It's tough to say exactly what his range is. Obviously, when you call a bet and a raise, your range is pretty strong. It's really as simple as that. Maybe he has queen 7 or something random and kind of bad in it, but I certainly think he can flop the set for sure, or just have a stronger queen. I don't think a player like this is going to fold really any queen to this bet, but I also don't think he's limp calling so many weaker queens that I'm still trying to shove the money in. So with the jack on the turn, I decided to just check fold there. If he folded and Ilvens had called this flop raise, I would have been betting again for value. But against this guy, Queen 10, very much a bluff catcher, and it's, how can he be bluffing if he calls a bet and a raise? He just doesn't have bluffs in his range. So, decided to just check fold that turn. Looks like I don't really get another hand till towards the end of the session here. I'm not sure anything really happens here either. Okay. Again, I just decided to defend with my ace queen. Even at this point, I guess I don't really have a great read on this opponent. He's done a few kind of random things, but he hasn't been particularly loose or anything, or particularly call stationy. So I decided not to free bet my ace queen. Looking back at it right now, I certainly could have free bet for value. I had both options. I'm not quite sure I'll call this a mistake, but I'll certainly say I had the option to free bet here. But, I decided to catch a really good flop from my hand, but just go for a check. I probably would have just check called. I'm not quite sure I would have check raised. But at this point, I definitely think I have the best hand a ton, and I'm going to go for 2 streets of value. I think when he checks behind here, a lot of times he does have a decent amount of showdown value, a hand like 5s, 6s, 8s, 9s, 10s, something along those lines. And I certainly want to bet for turn for value, expecting to call the turn a lot. And I want to size my river bet to try to get called from those marginal hands, so I opted for just approximately half pot. Obviously, the diamond's not a great card. It's possible for him to have called the turn with a diamond draw, but I assume it was just more of a marginal pocket pair. And this was another hand I did not take my standard line with. Well, so far I did. Certainly raising ace king under the gun, catch a really good flop, and go ahead and c-bet into these two, the two loser opponents. And after turning a king, I went for the check raise as opposed to barreling again. Like I said about his opponent before, although, after seeing a few more hands from him, my read at the time was certainly that he was a player who kind of bets when checked too. I'm assuming in some of these hands I didn't show you against other opponents, he did it a lot more often, because he hasn't quite done it in every pot I played with him. But that was my read on him at the time, that he did just bet a lot when checked too. So instead of firing the second barrel here, I decided to go for a check raise. Basically, I assumed that he would bet some hands which maybe some better opponents wouldn't, like maybe a middle pocket pair, which some opponents might try to get to showdown value, get to showdown with. I felt he might be betting. I thought he might even bet a flush draw. I definitely assumed he would raise a set on a flop. Clearly, with ace king, I'm going broke if I'm beat. Not, a big concern if he has 4s or 2s, so be it. But I didn't think I was beat here really ever. And also, I certainly thought if he had a king, my best way to get all the money in was to check raise here. If he has a hand like king 7 suited, there's at least some chance which he'll slow down and not raise the turn. I'm not quite sure if that's true or not, but again, there's some chance he won't raise the turn himself with a king 7, and I'll just end up going bet, and I won't get his full stack, whereas if I go for the check raise on the turn, I can make sure that the entire stack gets in if he does have a second best hand. So for all those reasons, I did decide to go for the check raise. My more standard line is to keep barreling here, but, yeah, I think I'd usually barrel, at least I'd barrel some percentage of the time. I'm certainly not always check raising this turn, but I went for the check raise, and I went ahead and raised pretty big as you could see. Again, I actually don't like my sizing here at all. I think something more like 14 would have 14, 16. I raised a bit too big for sure, but it was the last hand of the session. I guess maybe I wasn't. I was just trying to leave her. I don't know. The sizing isn't all that great. I certainly like a smaller check raise, but he pretty quickly folded. So it seems like I just induced a bluff at a kind of nothing would be my best guess. Maybe floated with an inside straight draw. I'm not exactly sure. So this is the second table. Let me go ahead and see if we have time for the third table of the session. Okay, so I just checked my recording time, and I'm actually almost exactly at 1 hour, so I'm not going to even start getting into this final table. You guys can let me know what you think about this video format. If you liked it, then I could certainly review this table in another session, or, just review a different session. But, as always, let me know what you think in the comments, and, good luck with the tables. This is Gewirtz with BluefirePoker.com.